Greetings from Toronto.
Greetings from New York City.
Thank you so much. Hi, Gary. Hi,
Hi,
Keith.
Sangeeta.
Yes. I welcome you to the 13th episode of the limited video series of literary and critical conversations. We have one of the most prolific American artists as our guest today, Gary Beck. Friends, he has attempted almost all literary genres, be it poetry, novel, short story, essay, or playwriting. He has translated plays of classical dramatists and have also directed them when performed at off-Broadway. Setu welcomes you for this one-to-one.
Thank you.
I take this opportunity to announce that last Saturday, the 26th of August, Setu was felicitated as the best online journal at the Canadian South Asian Literary Festival 2023.
Congratulations.
Thank
well
you.
deserved.
And this happens to be the second time. The first time it was felicitated by Avishkar Foundation, a Mumbai-based NGO. That was in 2022.
Very good. A fine magazine that deserves it.
Your best wishes. Now, some biographical details about our guest. Born and brought up in New York, USA, Gary Beck has spent most of his adult life as a theater director and worked as an art dealer when he could earn a living in the theater. He has also been a tennis pro, a ditch digger, and a salvage diver. His original plays and translations of Molière, Aristophanes, and Sophocles have been produced off Broadway. His poetry, fiction, and essays have appeared in hundreds of literary magazines, and his published books include 39 poetry collections, 14 novels, 4 short story collections, 2 collections of essays, and 8 books of plays. Published poetry books include Dawn in Cities, Assault on Nature, Songs of a Clerk, Fault Lines, The Remission of Order, and many more. His short story collections include A Glimpse of Youth, Now I Accuse, and Other Stories, Dogs Don't Send Flowers, and Other Stories. Gary lives in New York City. To know more about him, visit his website, garycbeck.com. With this, I welcome our versatile, multi-talented American poet, novelist, playwright, translator, and short story writer, Gary Beck, to this show.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, Gary, you are such an accomplished artist. You surely must be hailing from a very liberal and artistic background. Would you please share with us your family details and the formative influences of your childhood?
Well, my family basically were working people, and they were union people. And early on, I got involved with going to strikes with my father, and it became a struggle between the workers and the bosses. Mm-hmm. And that shaped me in a very social, economic way, in that, right or wrong, I'm always for labor, for the unions. Not that they're perfect, but to me, they're always better than the bosses. But that's my prejudice. Um, there were a lot of books in the house, and I seem to be the only one who read them. But I read things like Shakespeare, the complete plays at a very early age, Guy de Maupassant, O. Henry, the list goes on. And I loved it. It was a great escape. I had three worlds: school, which I really didn't fit in for whatever the reason, the street where I played sports with my friends, and then my little own world. And it was nurturing. I needed nurturing mentally, emotionally to grow as a person, which at
Mhm.
that time I really didn't fully understand, but I was going in the right direction. And about age 15, I started writing poetry. Well, at first, it was imitations of the British romantics, Byron, Keats, Shelley, and they were horrible. I mean, really awful.
Oh.
But I mean, really awful.
Uh-huh.
The only virtue was that they had meter and rhyme. Otherwise, they were really poor. But it was a learning process. It was a tool. And from there, I went on to my work, and it evolved from there. But from that point on, good or bad, it was always me. I wasn't really imitating anybody anymore. Um, does that give you enough background for that point?
Yeah, you can continue.
Could what?
You can carry
Oh,
on.
sure. Um, at that point, I was tired of high school, so I talked my way into college. And for me, it was a disappointment. Everybody was studying for a career, and I wanted learning. And I didn't know what I was to do. The only thing I kept doing was writing poetry. And again, it wasn't very sophisticated or mature yet, but it was me. However clumsy, it was me. And I just had to keep working to develop that.
Mm.
Um, I went to different colleges at different times to study different things. I studied Japanese literature in one school, Russian literature in another, uh,
Interesting.
the classics in another. So I had a good literary background by the time
Mm.
I ended my college activity.
Mhm. Translation in itself is a challenging art. Capturing the essence of the original is very daunting, and especially the fidelity to the text, and then carrying that into the target language. And Gary, you have translated plays of the Greek classics like Aristophanes, Sophocles, and of Moliere, the French dramatist whose works are sites of obscurity and unique linguistic dexterity for the modern readers. So, how did you bridge this gap? How much time did you invest there? And what was your experience as a translator, as a co translator?
Well, it started when I started my theater in 1975. Before that, I had always worked in other people's theaters, and I never did a classic before. So it was a new experience. And when I started reading the text of what I wanted to produce and direct on stage, they were horrible for the stage. Some of them were very good for translation, but not for modern audiences.
Mhm.
So I started work on Italian scenarios from the Commedia dell'arte, and they came from an Italian company of the 15th century called the I Gelosi, and they were the first professional theater company. And they did ballet, they did opera, they did tragedy, they did comedy, and then they did farce in public places in the little towns they traveled to.
Mhm.
Um, so I did that for 2.5 years, and the
Mhm.
company built skills from that. And then as that was winding down, I was translating Moliere. And at the beginning, my French was a little rusty because I hadn't used it in a number of years. So
Mhm.
I had to use a big Larousse dictionary, gigantic,
Oh.
but it worked. And the great asset that I had, which many other translators don't have, I had a theater company to read as I developed the work so that I could hear it and they could actually walk through it so we could see did it work on stage. And for me, that was the goal, not to produce, quote, an intellectual text, but a stage-worthy text, yet that was worthy of the original, being absolutely dedicated to making sure the original was followed through. The Molières went from the simplest farce comedy to very sophisticated. The last one I did was Les Précieuses Ridicules, Two Pretentious Maidens Ridiculed. And it was a beautiful play. It was the first great show I ever did. And I had been doing theater for a long time. The audiences loved it. It was very satisfactory to everybody, actors, audiences, director. Then I switched to Aristophanes. And for me, it was a transition logically from one form of comedy to another. But here I needed a co-translator. My Greek was not excellent. I was fortunate I had someone who also worked with the company. We started with, what did we start with? The Ecclesia Zeusai, the women in assembly. This is where the women in Athens take over the state because the men made a mess of it. And it was very funny. The audiences loved it. We toured colleges. We toured culturally underserved communities where we did outdoor performances. And then we did a full run at our theater. And it went right from there to the next, The Birds, which is a beautiful play. Then we went to Lysistrata, my favorite, which is the women of Greece unite under the leadership of Lysistrata to try to stop the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. But it's an anti-war play. But it's hysterically funny. It's raunchy. It's bawdy. And it's very poorly produced. I've seen about a dozen theater productions. I saw 2 movies of it. They weren't lively. They were either stereotyped like Spartan marching automatons or dirty, being filthy rather than bawdy. Bawdy can be clean but risque. And that's what I aimed for with the help of the translator. And the company had a blast. We did a great show. We had full houses. We had a large off-Broadway theater then with 125 seats. We sold out every show. We had standing room only. And we were just getting ready to transfer it to a legitimate off-Broadway theater when we lost the theater and we lost the government funding that paid our salaries. So a little delay, but then we got to Sophocles, which again was anew for me, the first tragedy that I directed. And I loved it. I mean, I enjoy comedy. I do it well, but I don't love it. I love tragedy for whatever the reasons. And Sophocles for me was beautiful because he's almost modern in certain ways. Everything in Sophocles is linked to fate. Everything you do is a certain way determined by fate. And my co-translator was a very notable Greek scholar. He came and worked with the company so that from the beginning, we had a living fabric that grew on stage. And again, the audiences loved it. The second show we did was Antigone, my favorite. And
Antigone.
It was the second Antigone. Yes, this is from the Oedipus cycle. Antigone, the daughter of Oedipus. And the audience loved it. We toured it to colleges, to, again, deprived cultural communities. They loved it. When the soldiers came to take Antigone away for her death, the audience yelled, "No, no, don't take her." So it was wonderful. And it was special
to me. A bit louder,
me.
Please.
What?
Louder.
Yes. And it was special for me because I played Tiresias, the blind prophet. So it was doubly enjoyable.
Which one?
Tiresias, the blind prophet. He came to tell Creon, the new king of Thebes, after Oedipus renounced the throne because of his sins, and his sons were killed, and Creon became king, and he refused to bury Antigone's brother. So when she insisted on doing it, he put her to death. And the audience wouldn't allow it. They just said, "No, no, don't take her," which is wonderful. I live in a period, well, this was different. This was in the 1980s, and audiences already had seen it all on television. They had to be really reached to get them to react deeply to theater on stage. And we
Mm-hmm.
did that. So it was very satisfactory. And the last Greek one we did of Sophocles was The Searching Satyrs. A satyr play is a farce. It's meant to be shown after a full day of serious drama. In the Greek theater, a play would be rehearsed for a whole year, and there'd be three of them.
Oh,
And then it would be produced once and only once. And at the end of that three-play cycle in one day, they put on a comic farce so the audience would be relaxed after the big drama. This was 2,500 years ago. There was no TV, there was no radio, there was no
I
newspapers.
can understand.
All they had was going to the theater to see this. So
Mm-hmm.
they were the best audience in history. So I had to combat that. And we did a great job. It was a funny farce where the satyrs have to search for the stolen cows of Apollo that Hermes used to invent music. And it was bawdy and it was serious at the same time. The audiences loved it. The critics didn't like it. They thought the satyrs were too vulgar. They didn't know that satyrs are supposed to be vulgar. But for us, it was a good show. And there's one other classic I did, the Agamemnon by Aeschylus, which was the last
Um,
classic I did.
oh, wow.
It was a lot. This
Yeah,
went
that's
on for 10
huge.
years.
Actually, the work that you have done is awe-inspiring.
I was inspired every day, one way or the other. It was exciting, challenging, fulfilling, rich. How can I say enough? It was wonderful.
Yes, so fantastic childhood, a very enriching one, and then awe-inspiring work that you have been doing. Are you practicing even now, Gary? I was curious to know, or
I
you
write
have
every
slowed
day.
down?
I write every day. I
Oh,
every
really?
day I write in a novel and a poetry collection, sometimes
Great,
more. So to me, till the day I cannot lift my hand, I keep writing.
great.
My life changed in 1996 when my theater closed permanently. From that day up until then, I worked 14 hours a day at the theater, as well as the plays. We did special programs for troubled youth, homeless youth, prison youth. So I was busy day and night. So
Hmm.
when the theater closed, I had all this time to write that I never had before. So I started writing novels, short
Yeah,
stories, one act plays, essays. It was more poetry. It was wonderful.
yeah.
I'd rather do theater, but writing is great.
Hats off to you and to your marvelous work. Gary, was it a cakewalk to get the producers for these plays at Off Broadway? And
Moi,
how's the situation now? Off Broadway, and off Broadway? May I know that?
sure. I was my producer basically, with a board of directors that helped. I was the producer, the director. I did it all. It was
I
a
see.
different world then. It was very hard to get money from people and producers who wanted to do things off of Broadway because there was no real money in it. And
Mm-hmm.
producers basically need to make money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at that point, I was very familiar with off Broadway and off Broadway, where we did different productions. I never got to Broadway as a director, but I came close. And I certainly know Broadway well from many actors and directors, and I've been to Broadway theaters. So it's a different world, it's commercial. The first law, you must make money. If you don't make money, the show can't continue.
Hmm.
I came from a different world. I was more interested in the art of what I was doing. And to me, the money was secondary. So it could never go to Broadway because it just wasn't big enough. Um, Today, Broadway is in terrible trouble. The people who
Oh,
went, yes, the people who went to Broadway shows are now old. they're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. There's not a younger generation. The prices of theater went from the $50 to $60 in the 80s and 90s to now $150 and $200. Schools cannot afford to buy tickets. So there's no new generations going to theater. Video, television, the internet have become so sophisticated that young people go to that and they're not going to the theater. Off-Broadway has become so expensive that you need $2 million to do a show off-Broadway. Whereas I did an off-Broadway show in 1982 for like $70,000. It's a huge difference, which means if you put in $2 million, you've got to make money back. Truthfully, I haven't followed off-Broadway lately very well, so I can't tell you too much about it, except it's different than it was in the 1970s and 1980s. It's difficult for people to find space because it's so expensive. It's difficult for them to keep working because they have to have jobs because they don't make money off Broadway. And you have to have crazy people who commit 10 years of their lives without making money. And very few people are willing to do that. I fear for the future of theater because I love theater, whether it's mine or others. And it's going to end because it's just can't compete with video, with television, with the internet. Did you see the movie Avatar by any chance?
No.
It's this incredibly high-tech movie made about 8 years ago. It's just beautiful. And you look at that and you go to the theater and it's drab compared to that, except for people who love theater. But they're old and they're gone in another few years and there's nobody to replace them. I'm sorry to say.
That's so.
But that's my opinion. Others don't agree with me.
Can you be a bit louder? I request you, because your voice is decreasing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is that better?
We'll see now.
Yes, good.
Thank you for your responses. So, Gary, 14 novels, 39 poetry collections, 4 short story collections, and so much more is not a mean feat, with the rest of the life's obligations to be borne simultaneously. So, how did you manage these labors of love? What was your routine?
Well, I started looking, I published in magazines, I guess, starting in the late 80s, early 90s. And I started making friends. My first novel I finished in 1997. I finished my first formal poetry collection about the same year. And I found great publishers for both of them. They both wanted to do readings, tours, publicity, promotion. And the day the novel was published, the company went out of business. The day my poetry collection, the first one, Expectations, was published, the company went out of business. So from that point, hard luck. But it didn't matter, because whatever happened, I kept writing. I kept sending books out to publishers. They kept taking them. I kept publishing more and more poetry books, novels. My plays were published in books, my short stories in collections. It was a long process. It started basically in 1996. It continues to this day. My 3 plays of Sophocles are going to be published this month. I think it's September 14th. And it's very exciting for me because I love that work. I love the Sophocles. So I'm really looking forward to that. Does that give you enough background for publishing?
Yeah, pretty cool.
I try.
Talking about the importance of poetry, you have said in one of your interviews I saw online that poetry is the direct vehicle to reach people, the least expensive of the arts, as long as it's meaningful and comprehensible, especially for children. our
Yes.
young minds who will inherit the future. So, in light of this, could you amplify this statement and also tell us the features of contemporary poetry?
It starts from two ways. One, for years, I worked with disadvantaged children, homeless children, prison youth, and I had to reach them. And they weren't in school, they were troubled. I used, and so did my coworkers, because I had theater people work with me, theater and circus arts and video arts. And once they were reading and writing with us and doing things, I'd bring them to poetry. The virtue of poetry is it's the cheapest physical way to reach people. Theater production takes many people and money. Painting takes people and money. Poetry can be one person with others. And when you get kids to write their poetry, they're discovering themselves in a new world. So to me, that's very exciting. But it was very personal. It was not necessarily where I wanted to go with my poetry, but it was where they had to go with theirs. For me, my poetry is oriented mainly to issues social, political, economic, military, because I'm concerned with the problems of my times and the future times. I don't tend to look back at the past too much, except to learn from it, but I
Mhm.
worry about the future. So that
Mhm.
poetry to me always was people, poets challenging their times one way or the other. One of
Mhm.
my favorite poets was Byron, the Romantic, who went to Greece in 1923 to
Right.
fight against the Turks for freedom. And he died at Missolonghi during the siege
Yeah,
of,
he died very young.
very young. He was 32, I think.
Yeah.
But the point is, he fought for freedom. He fought for what he believed in. And that's what I feel poetry should be. And it's not that every poet has to go out and fight war, but I believe we have to speak out against the issues of our times. Today, poetry has gone in different directions.
Mm.
Many of the poets write about their personal
Oh, I
conflicts,
know.
the pains of their childhood, the problems that they faced. That to me is trivial. And it's not that it's unimportant to them, but it's not important to me for the issues of what our time should be. I believe in talking about what I feel is important for people, readers, to understand is wrong in the world. I can't change it physically, but I can point out that capitalism is the enemy of the people. And I believe that. I believe that big corporations are changing the nature of life for all of us without our willingness. And I write about that. Does
Oh,
that give
great.
you enough of that?
So tell us something about your favorite book, or
Uh,
you can read out a short excerpt to us if you want, the way you narrate the scenes to your actors.
my favorite book is John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. I believe it's the
Which one?
finest, The Grapes of Wrath.
The Grapes of Wrath. Yeah.
Yes, I believe it's the finest American novel of the 20th and 21st centuries. It's a
Yes.
wonderful book. The basic idea is that this is in the latter part of the Depression of the 1930s, when there was a great wind and dust storm in
Mm.
places like Oklahoma, and all the poor farmers, the sharecropper works on somebody else's land for a share of the profits. And the earth blew away, so they couldn't make money anymore. And the owners took the land back. So all these people, and there were tens and tens of thousands of families with nowhere to go. So they all heard that there was money to be made picking fruit in California. And they traveled there in terrible automobiles and trucks that could barely move, big families, with the hope of finding work. When
Mm-hmm.
they got there, they found that the capitalist owners of these fields would only pay pennies for work. And it wasn't enough to do anything but get a little bit of food. And then they wouldn't let them all in. They only let those who would obey in. And this book is about a family that goes through that struggle. And it's a combination of heartbreaking and ennobling because they fight each day to survive and do their best and be proud and dignified. To me, it's a great struggle in the American way of life and the world way of life against the masters who want to enslave the poor people.
Yeah.
It's a great book. I love it.
20th century, yes. 20th
20th
century.
century.
Yeah.
The only greater book in American literature, obviously, is Moby Dick. You may have read it. Moby Dick, a great book.
Yes, yes.
A great book. The other two great books are Don Quixote, which I've only read in English, so I don't know how great it is, and War and Peace, which again, I've only read in English and French, so I don't really know. They're great books. I just don't know them in the natural language.
Lovely to hear all this from a person like you, the great writer.
I'm not a great writer. I am a trying writer, aspiring writer.
You have a huge opus.
Yes. Yes, it's big. I need people to read it, though. I have a couple of novels that I think are incredibly good. I have one novel that I think may be the best novel of the 21st century, but I don't have anybody to read it. It's frustrating, but yet rich because I have it, no matter what.
These are heart-rending tales. And novels, you get absorbed in them by the time you reach the end of the novels. So they really move you a lot.
I love the process. I love the idea of creating. I was a born liar, and I discovered that later I wasn't really a liar. I was a storyteller. And that's what I did in everything, my plays, my novels, my short stories, even my poetry in a way. I'm a storyteller, and I want people to read my stories. And some people have, so I'm rich that way. I'm lucky. I just like more people to read it.
Well, I want to know in the current times, what ingredients make a successful novel? Can you give some tips to the aspiring novelists?
That's complicated for me. I am a dedicated professional to my craft, but it's my craft. It's not necessarily successful commercial writing. Commercial writing has to reach a lot of people with enough story, enough action, enough character ingredients to engage them so that they want to read more. I come from a different point of view. I want to move people with certain, I don't know if I should say truths, but at least say issues. And issues are trivial or secondary in good commercial writing. So it depends what writers want to do. If they want to be commercial, they have to read the good commercial writers like Nelson DeMille, Stephen King, some of the others, and get a feeling for what people want to read and practice it and then find their own voice. If they want to do a different kind of writing like mine, I feel sorry for them because they're going to struggle for a long time. I've taught poetry and I've taught other writing, so it's easy for me to deal with that. But what I can't do is mislead them.
Thanks for sharing these wonderful insights into the process of writing novels. I trust that the discerning audience will surely benefit out of your observations.
I hope so. I may be born of a different time so that my audience may not be there anymore. I hope not. I don't believe that, but it may be. Whatever it is, I try to do my best every day at what I do.
Yeah. So what are the overarching themes of your works, poetry, drama, and short fiction?
The struggle of man, frequently working class or poor people or middle class people, to come to terms with a world that doesn't welcome them, where the rich are exploitative, where they have everything. They have 5 yachts while working people go hungry or have to have 2 jobs to survive. I look at economic issues, the unfairness of life, in which I'll give you the great example. When President Trump was elected, he gave the big corporations $1 trillion and they promised to start new jobs for the people. Instead, they rebought their stock and they gave their executives huge bonuses. This to me is a great iniquity. I mean, the world has changed in America. I follow that more than the rest of the world because it's my country. So that in the 30s and 40s and 50s, we had strong unions with working class people who made big money, and they would fight the bosses for their rights. That's over. That's ended.
Okay.
The unions have become weak. They cannot compel. The bosses are very clever. They took their corporations offshore to other countries so that they're not dependent on American people anymore. So we have a bigger and bigger class who go to college, come out, and can't find work. So they have to do service jobs. To me, that's the end of the nation. Just as the Roman Empire crumbled after 1,000 years, I'm afraid we are crumbling. And it's my biggest fear, my biggest heartache.
That's a
That's what I
sad
try to write about.
situation. Yeah, it's very sad.
For me, remember, it's different. In India, India is now coming to a revival, and it has hopefully a great future. They put a lander on the moon recently. That's wonderful, and I hope the country thrives. I wish them well, but I worry about my country first.
But unemployment is a global issue, whether it's India or America or Canada.
Agreed.
So the
Agreed.
governments should find out some way where they could help the youngsters, the
Well,
unemployed people.
that's where the future is. But I don't like the future where our children have to go to work at McDonald's or coffee houses. I want them to have challenging jobs. They learn the hard way that going
That's
to college and becoming a liberal arts major doesn't go anywhere anymore. There's no future in that.
Yeah, decent jobs should be provided.
Yes, agreed.
Collected essays of Gary Beck. You have one book of essay up your sleeve. Essays are considered to be prosaic stuff. So, what made you attempt this genre, which has got such few practitioners? And what are the themes of these essays?
Well, it started in a very practical way. I was running a program at my theater for homeless families and children. And at the time, they were living in very, very degraded welfare hotels. I went to those hotels with my theater people to reach the children and families, and they were horrible conditions, horrible. So I started writing letters to elected officials and appointed officials. Nobody answered. So I wrote my first essay, basically about the homeless, and
Homeless.
about homelessness. And what I did write about was methods of finding new ways to house the homeless that other people hadn't considered. So I wrote the essay. I had it published in magazines. I sent it to judges, to senators. I even sent it to the mayor, and nobody responded. But from that point on, I found myself writing other essays. And I have two basic kinds. One is about theater and the arts. And there I write about my feelings and experiences and my fear that the audiences are graying out, getting too old. And the other are social issues, where I write about the abuses of capitalism.
Great. It's too daunting a task. Kudos to you.
I never dawned.
Huh?
I never dawned. Unless they kill me, which they don't bother, I never stop. I write what I want to write. I say what I have to say. I've been lucky that I've had many, many.
That's the mark of a true artist.
I believe I am a true artist. It took me a long time to accept that, but I do believe I am a true artist with many human failings. but a true artist.
One more question, Gary. What do you think the government should do to see that the theaters survive and the artists earn their living?
They will not do anything anymore. We pay taxes to government like the National Endowment for the Arts, and they give money to regional theaters and to some
Please
off-Broadway.
shift this side a bit.
The what?
Your face is not visible. Yeah,
Sorry.
now it is. Yes.
I'm back with you. The problem is theater may be dying. I believe it's dying. And because of that, it can't be saved. There's no way that theater can compete with the visual excitement of movies, cinema, big screen, and then small screen streaming. They can't compete. It's too beautiful visually. You have to have people who are excited by live performance, and they're now getting too old. I don't think theater can be saved. And truthfully, historically, theater has died many times and been resurrected many times. After the Roman Empire, there was almost no theater until the Middle Ages that we know of. There's just none. And there was no professional theater until the 15th century. All theater in Rome was for the nobles, for the aristocrats. By the Restoration in the 1600s, the 1660s, actually, that was the first time women were allowed to perform in theater.
Yeah.
So there are ups and downs, and it's very lively. After that, for a period of 50, 75 years, there wasn't any important theater. And then it came back again. So theater has been born and died, and I'm hoping it'll be born again in the space age. When India goes to Tau Ceti, maybe Indian theater will go with it. They'll tell the story of the Mahabharata.
Mahabharata. Well, any message to the budding artists?
Yes, if you're not a born artist, don't waste your time trying to be an artist. Do something else. If you are a born artist, suffer and learn to do your art, whatever it may be. I was an art dealer on and off many years, so I know art well. Many great artists were my friends. I knew artists like Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein. I could go on naming them, many of them. I knew how they struggled and how they succeeded, but only a few do. The many, they can work as hard as they like. They will never be big. That's the way it is. True artists are born. If you are a born artist and you are lucky, you'll develop your skills, talent, and ability, and then maybe you'll succeed. Maybe you won't. Difficult work for artists. Difficult.
Oh, sad. So give a careful ear to the veteran friends. He has borne it all, so he knows the best that he could.
I know a little. I know a little. The little I know, I believe. And when I'm wrong, I apologize. I'm wrong a lot of times. I just try hard. When you try hard, you make a lot of mistakes, and I do.
Yes, and you have the satisfaction. What you said, that I have the satisfaction.
I have great satisfaction. Yes, I'm very lucky that way. Great satisfaction. Great frustration, but great satisfaction.
True. And you are leaving your footprints for the posterity.
Well, they will be blown away by the wind, probably. But it doesn't matter. I have tried my best. I could do no better than my best. My hope that someday people find my books, read them, and love them. That's my hope. If it doesn't happen, what can I say? The house of hope is built on sand.
Oh.
That is from a poem by an old Arab poet, Haji Abdul El Yazdi. My favorite line: the house of hope is built on sand. That's what my house is built on.
It might crumble anytime.
Anytime. And it has crumbled for me many times. I was lucky. I was able to rebuild many times.
One should keep building.
That's all one can do in this life.
So thanks for your quality time, Gary.
Thank you. A pleasure talking to you.
Yes. Please shift a bit this side. Your face. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have the big screen right now.
Yeah. So thanks, viewers. Thanks, Gary, for being with us. In our next episode, we will be here with yet another distinguished guest. Thank you so much, Gary. We are honored to have you. And so till then, bye-bye.
Thank you. It's great to be with Setu, a fine magazine who has published my poetry many times. I admire them and respect them and hope to publish with them again.
Yes. Thank you. Till then, bye-bye.
Till then, bye-bye.